The champagne glass shattered across marble floors, but that wasn't the sound that would change everything. Grace stood at the entrance of the most exclusive charity gala in the city, 6 months pregnant, watching a beautiful blonde woman mock her cheap dress in front of hundreds of wealthy guests. Her husband, the man who promised to love and protect her, just laughed and walked away. That woman? His mistress. And she had no idea who she was really dealing with. You see, Grace had been hiding a secret so big that when it came out on that stage, her husband's face went white. The mistress's smirk froze and died, and the entire ballroom fell into stunned silence. Because the pregnant wife they dismissed as a nobody, she was worth more than everyone in that room combined. This is the story of how one public humiliation became the most satisfying revelation of the year. How a woman they thought had no options revealed she had all the power. Corporate sponsorships, things like that. And you've met her before tonight? Grace hesitated. No, Blake mentioned her a few times, always very professional, very organized, very impressive. The words tasted bitter. Rachel made a sound that clearly indicated what she thought of that. On the stage, someone was testing the microphone. Feedback squealed briefly before cutting off. The ambient noise in the room began to settle as people found their seats. Grace watched Blake make his way to a table near the front. Table 3. The table for major donors and board members. Veronica sat down beside him, not across from him, beside him. Their chairs were close enough that their shoulders nearly touched. Grace's chest felt tight. Breathe, Rachel said quietly. Grace breathed, in through her nose, out through her mouth, the way her obstetrician had taught her, the way she'd been practicing for labor. She just hadn't expected to need the technique for surviving a charity gala. They walked into the evening sunlight. Grace, Harrison, Rachel, and tiny Eleanor. A family built not just on blood, but on choice, on love, on commitment to truth and authenticity and justice. Behind them, the Whitmore Foundation building stood tall, a monument to Eleanor's legacy, a promise of the work ahead. In front of them, the city spread out in all its complicated beauty, full of need and opportunity, full of people working with inadequate resources to build better communities, full of possibility. Grace took a deep breath, felt the weight of her daughter against her chest, felt the support of her brother at her side, felt the strength she'd found in choosing herself. She was Eleanor Whitmore's daughter. She was little Eleanor's mother. She was Grace, fully herself, without apology, without hiding. And that was more than enough. It was everything. And that's Grace's story. A woman who chose herself, who chose truth over comfort, who chose authenticity over acceptance. If this story resonated with you, if you've ever felt invisible, underestimated, or pressured to be smaller than you are, I'd love to hear from you in the comments. Share your thoughts. Share your own experiences. Let's build a community of people who refuse to hide. And if you enjoyed this story, please hit that like button. It helps more people find these stories of strength, transformation, and choosing yourself. Subscribe to the channel for more stories about women who refuse to accept less than they deserved. Stories about courage, authenticity, and the power that comes from being fully yourself. Share this with someone who needs to hear it. We all know someone who's making themselves smaller for someone else's comfort. Maybe this story will be the push they need to stop hiding. Thank you for listening to Grace's journey. Thank you for being here. And remember, you are enough exactly as you are. You don't need to hide your truth to deserve love. I'll see you in the next story. Until then, choose yourself. Choose authenticity. Choose courage. Take care. The lights dimmed slightly. A man in a tuxedo walked onto the stage. Senator Robert Davenport. Grace recognized him from photographs. He was the honorary chair of the gala, a longtime supporter of the hospital. Good evening, everyone. Senator Davenport's voice boomed through the sound system. Welcome to the 25th Annual Metro Hospital Charity Gala. Applause filled the room. Grace clapped automatically, her hands moving without thought. Tonight we celebrate not just the incredible work of Metro Hospital, but the generous spirit of this community, the senator continued. The funds raised here tonight will support critical programs, expand services to underserved populations, and save lives. More applause. Grace felt disconnected from it all. like she was watching from somewhere far away. The baby kicked. She pressed her hand against the movement, feeling the tiny life inside her, her daughter. She knew it was a girl, though she and Blake had decided not to find out the sex. But Grace knew, the same way she knew when it was going to rain. The same way she knew when something was wrong. And something was very wrong. She looked across the room again. Blake was leaning toward Veronica, whispering something. Veronica laughed, her hand on his arm. Grace's phone buzzed. She checked it, lock, unlock, lock. Nothing important, just her world quietly falling apart. But Grace hadn't always been the woman who swallowed her words. Senator Davenport droned on about community partnerships and transformative philanthropy. Grace barely heard him. Her mind had already drifted backward, pulled by the current of memory to a different version of herself, a version that felt impossibly distant now. 3 years ago, late spring, the cherry blossoms had been falling like snow. Grace closed her eyes and let herself remember. She'd been working at the Riverside Community Foundation for just over a year, program coordinator. The person who reviewed grant applications, conducted site visits, wrote reports that no one important ever read. It was good work, meaningful work, the kind of work her mother had taught her mattered most. Her mother, Eleanor Whitmore. Grace's throat tightened at the thought. Eleanor had died 5 years ago. Pancreatic cancer. 6 weeks from diagnosis to funeral. Grace had been 24 years old, still in graduate school, still figuring out who she wanted to be. Her mother had left her everything. Well, half of everything. Harrison, Grace's older brother, got the other half. Everything turned out to be substantially more than Grace had ever imagined. Eleanor Whitmore had been a billionaire. Not the flashy kind who bought yachts and threw parties. The quiet kind who lived simply, invested wisely, and gave generously. She'd built her fortune through tech investments in the 1990s, then spent the rest of her life trying to give it away responsibly. The Whitmore Foundation, assets exceeding $400 million, annual giving of over $20 million, focused on education, healthcare, and economic opportunity for underserved communities. Grace and Harrison inherited it all. They'd agreed immediately to maintain their mother's approach. Live simply, give generously, work quietly, don't draw attention, don't become those people, the ones who thought money made them better than everyone else. Harrison moved to New York to manage the foundation's investments. Grace stayed local, taking a job in the nonprofit sector to understand the field from the inside. She used her maiden name professionally, Whitmore, but kept it separate from her personal life. She wanted to be normal. She wanted real relationships. She wanted to be loved for herself, not for her bank account. And then she'd met Blake. Grace opened her eyes. The memory was so vivid she could almost smell the coffee shop where they'd first spoken. Almost taste the overpriced latte she'd been drinking. Blake had been working at Morrison and Webb, a mid-sized corporate law firm. He'd come to the foundation to discuss a potential partnership. His firm wanted to sponsor some community programs, get their name associated with good causes. He'd been charming, attentive, interested in her opinions about nonprofit work, about community needs, about what really made a difference. He'd asked her to dinner. She'd said yes. 6 months of dating. He'd never asked about her family, never questioned why she lived in a modest apartment when she clearly had a good education, never wondered why she drove an old Honda and wore simple clothes. He saw a nonprofit worker, someone earnest and idealistic, someone who cared more about meaning than money. He fell in love with that version of her. Or so she'd thought. They'd married at the courthouse. Small ceremony, just a few friends. Harrison had flown in from New York, his expression carefully neutral the entire time. He'd taken Grace aside afterward. "Are you sure about this?" he'd asked. "I love him," Grace had replied. "Does he know?" She'd known what Harrison meant. Does he know who you really are? Does he know about the money? "I want him to love me," she'd said. "Just me." Harrison had hugged her. "Okay, but Gracie, if he loves you, he'll love all of you. You shouldn't have to hide." Grace had dismissed his concerns. Blake loved her. That was enough. Except now, sitting in this ballroom with her belly swollen and her heart aching, Grace wondered if Blake had ever really known her at all. "Ladies and gentlemen, we'll begin our dinner service shortly," Senator Davenport announced. Please enjoy the evening, and thank you again for your generous support. The lights came up slightly. Waiters began circulating with salad courses. Rachel leaned closer to Grace. You okay? You looked a million miles away. Just thinking, Grace said. Bout? Grace shook her head. Nothing important. But that was a lie. It was everything important. The foundation of her marriage, the choices she'd made, the secrets she'd kept. She'd never told Blake about the money. Never told him she was Eleanor Whitmore's daughter. Never told him that her work at the foundation was partly funded by her own family's wealth. She'd kept her maiden name at work, Grace Whitmore, program coordinator. At home, she was Grace Holloway, Blake's wife. Two separate identities, two separate lives. It had seemed romantic at first, like she was protecting something precious, keeping their love pure and untainted by material considerations. Now it just felt foolish. Her phone buzzed. She checked it automatically. Lock, unlock, lock. A text from Blake. Sitting with the board members. Networking opportunity, you understand? She stared at the message. 3 years of marriage and he still didn't ask. He told. He assumed she'd understand. Assumed she'd be fine. Grace typed back. Okay. What else could she say? Rachel was talking to someone else at their table now, an older woman who worked with a youth mentorship program. Grace should join the conversation, should network, should be present. Instead, she watched Blake across the room. He'd ordered wine, expensive wine probably. The kind he liked to impress clients with. Veronica said something that made the whole table laugh. Blake's hand was on the table close to hers, not touching, but close. Grace's mother used to say that the truth was less about words and more about proximity, about who stood where, about whose hand was close to whose. The baby kicked again. Grace placed both hands on her belly, feeling the movement. Her daughter, growing inside her. Completely dependent on Grace to protect her, provide for her, love her. What kind of example was Grace setting? What was she teaching her as daughter about self-worth, about dignity, about demanding respect? The salad arrived at their table, arugula with candied walnuts and goat cheese. Grace picked up her fork and took a small bite. It tasted like nothing. You need to eat, Rachel said, noticing, for the baby. Grace nodded and took another bite, chewed mechanically, swallowed. Across the room, Veronica leaned close to Blake, whispering something. He smiled. That smile, the one Grace used to think was reserved for her. Her phone buzzed again. She checked it. Lock, unlock, lock. Harrison. In town tomorrow. Lunch? We need to discuss foundation business. Grace's heart skipped. Harrison never just dropped into town. He scheduled visits weeks in advance, coordinated with foundation meetings, made appointments with financial advisors. And how sometimes the people who underestimate you give you the greatest gift, the chance to prove exactly who you are. Stay with me, because what happens next will leave you cheering. This is about more than revenge. It's about a woman who finally stopped hiding and started living. Let's begin. The champagne glass shattered before Grace even heard the words. Crystal fragments scattered across the marble entrance of the Grand Marco Hotel, catching the light from a dozen chandeliers overhead. Grace Holloway froze, her hand instinctively moving to her rounded belly. 6 months pregnant, and she still wasn't used to how her body announced her presence before she could speak. Oh, honey, did you get lost on your way to the volunteer check-in? The voice cut through the ambient noise of arriving guests, sharp, deliberately loud enough to carry. Grace looked up to find a woman blocking her path. She texted back, "Everything okay?" 3 dots appeared indicating he was typing. They disappeared, appeared again. Disappeared. Finally, we'll talk tomorrow. Grace set her phone down. Her hands were shaking slightly. Grace? Rachel's voice broke through her spiraling thoughts. Honey, you're pale. Do you need to leave? I can drive you home. No, Grace said automatically. I'm fine, just tired. You're allowed to be tired. You're growing a human. Grace smiled weakly. I need to stay. For the awards. We nominated several programs for funding. I should be here. That was the truth, but it was also easier than admitting she didn't want to leave. Didn't want to go home to an empty apartment and wonder where Blake was. didn't want to face the growing chasm between who she thought she was and who she actually was. So she stayed. She ate her salad. She made polite conversation with the others at her table. She smiled when appropriate and nodded at the right moments. But inside, something fundamental had shifted. The truth matters less than timing, her mother used to say. You can tell people who you are 1,000 times, but they'll only hear it when they're ready. Grace was starting to wonder if Blake would ever be ready. And more importantly, she was starting to wonder if it mattered anymore. The main course arrived with theatrical precision. Waiters in crisp uniforms glided between tables, presenting plates of herb-crusted salmon with roasted vegetables and saffron risotto. The presentation was beautiful. The portions were small. Everything about the evening was designed to look generous while remaining carefully controlled. Grace cut into her salmon. The knife moved smoothly through the tender flesh. She should be hungry. She was eating for two, after all, but her stomach felt tight and unsettled. Rachel was deep in conversation with the woman from the youth mentorship program. Something about securing additional funding for after-school programs. Grace should be listening, should be taking mental notes, should be doing her job. Instead, her attention kept drifting to table 3. Blake was holding court. She could see it even from this distance. The way people leaned in when he spoke, the way he gestured with his wine glass, confident and commanding. He'd always been good at this, the performance of success. Veronica sat beside him, her posture perfect, her smile bright. She touched Blake's arm again as she made a point to the man on her other side. Blake didn't pull away. Grace's phone buzzed. She reached for it automatically. Lock, unlock, lock. No new messages. She set it down and forced herself to take a bite of salmon. It was perfectly cooked. It tasted like sawdust. "Excuse me," Grace murmured to Rachel. "I need to use the restroom." Rachel glanced at her, concern flickering across her face. "Want me to come with you?" "I'm fine. Just pregnancy bladder." Grace forced a smile. "It's constant." She pushed back her chair carefully, mindful of her belly. Standing took effort. Everything took effort these days. She smoothed her navy dress and made her way toward the hallway where the restrooms were located. The noise of the ballroom faded as she walked. Her heels clicked on marble floors. She passed other guests heading in the same direction. A woman in a silver gown, a man checking his phone, everyone moving through their own carefully constructed realities. Grace rounded a corner into a service corridor. Quieter here. The staff used this area to access the kitchen and storage rooms. She knew the layout from her event planning work. The restrooms were just ahead. "Trust me, Lisa, Blake's already talking to Marcus about divorce lawyers." Grace stopped walking. The voice was coming from around the next corner. Female, familiar. Veronica. Grace's heart began to pound. She should turn around. Should go back the way she came. Should not listen to a private conversation. She didn't move. "No, she has no idea," Veronica continued. "She must be on her phone. He's being smart about it, waiting until after the baby's born. That way he has leverage in the custody negotiations." Grace's vision blurred at the edges. She pressed one hand against the wall to steady herself. "The baby is his meal ticket," Veronica said, her voice dripping with satisfaction. "She's got nothing. No family money, no career trajectory, no options. He'll offer some minimal settlement, and she'll take it because what choice does she have? She's about to be a single mother with no support system." The baby kicked, hard, as if protesting the words. "Blake said she was convenient at the time," Veronica laughed. "Young, impressionable, easy to manage. But now he needs a wife who can actually help his career. Someone with connections. Someone who belongs in rooms like this." Grace's throat closed. She couldn't breathe, couldn't think, couldn't process what she was hearing. "Anyway, I need to get back," Veronica said. "Call you tomorrow." "Yes, I know. Isn't it perfect? Blake Holloway, eligible bachelor. Well, he will be soon enough." Footsteps approached. Grace forced herself to move, slipping into the women's restroom before Veronica could round the corner and see her. The bathroom was empty, elegant, all marble and gold fixtures and soft lighting. Grace stumbled to the nearest stall and locked herself inside. She sat on the closed toilet seat, still fully dressed, her hands pressed against her belly. The baby kicked again and again, responding to Grace's racing heart, her shallow breathing, her panic. "It's okay," Grace whispered. "We're okay." But they weren't okay. Blake was planning to divorce her, had been planning it, was already talking to lawyers, saw their baby as leverage, saw Grace as convenient and easy to manage. 3 years of marriage. 3 years of believing she was loved. Convenient, easy to manage. No family money. Grace pressed her fist against her mouth to muffle the sound threatening to escape. Not a sob. Something deeper. Something that came from a place she'd been carefully avoiding for months. She'd known something was wrong. Had felt it in the way Blake looked at her now, the way he forgot to ask about her day, the way he scheduled meetings during her doctor's appointments and shrugged when she mentioned it. But knowing something was wrong and hearing it confirmed in such brutal terms were two different things. A woman entered the bathroom. High heels clicked on marble. A stall door opened and closed 2 spots down. Grace held her breath, trying to silence even her existence. Her mother's voice echoed in her memory. The truth matters less than timing. Grace had been waiting for the right time to tell Blake about the money, waiting until their marriage was stronger, waiting until the baby was born, waiting for some perfect moment that would never come, because Blake had never wanted to know the truth. He wanted the version of her that fit his narrative, the convenient wife, the manageable partner, the woman with no options. The other woman left the restroom. Grace remained sitting, staring at the back of the stall door. Someone had scratched graffiti into the paint. "Jessica loves Marco," a heart drawn with a key. Grace's phone buzzed in her clutch. She pulled it out with shaking hands, unlocked it, locked it, unlocked it. A text from Blake. "Where are you? Awards ceremony starting soon." Not, "Are you okay?" Not, "Do you need anything?" Just, "Where are you?" Because her location mattered more than her well-being. Grace typed, "Restroom back soon." She stood up slowly. Her reflection in the stall's polished metal fixture looked distorted, warped, like she was seeing herself through water. She emerged from the stall and went to the sink, ran cold water over her wrists, splashed some carefully on her face, trying not to ruin her minimal makeup, pressed damp paper towels against her flushed cheeks. Another woman entered the bathroom. Older, elegant. She glanced at Grace with the practiced disinterest of someone who'd seen countless women crying in bathroom stalls at formal events. "Are you all right, dear?" the woman asked, her tone perfunctory. "Fine," Grace said automatically. "Just pregnancy hormones." The woman smiled tightly and disappeared into a stall. Grace looked at herself in the mirror. Really looked. She saw a woman in a simple navy dress. A woman with swollen ankles and dark circles under her eyes. A woman who'd been working full-time while growing a human being. A woman who'd convinced herself that love was enough, but she also saw something else. Something she'd forgotten was there. Eleanor Whitmore's daughter. Grace dried her hands carefully, reapplied her lipstick, smoothed her dress. The truth matters less than timing. Maybe it was time to reconsider what truth needed to be told, and to whom. She walked back to the ballroom with her head high and her heart breaking. The ballroom had transformed while Grace was gone. The lights had dimmed further, leaving only the stage brightly illuminated. Dessert had been served in her absence, something chocolate with gold leaf and raspberries. Rachel had already eaten hers. "There you are," Rachel said, as Grace slid back into her seat. "I was about to send a search party. Everything okay?" "Fine," Grace said. The lie came easily now, smooth and practiced. "Just needed a minute." Rachel studied her face. "You're pale." "I'm always pale." Grace picked up her dessert fork, though the thought of eating made her stomach turn. "What did I miss?" Senator Davenport gave a speech about community impact. Very passionate, very lengthy. Rachel paused. "Grace, are you sure you're okay? You look like you've seen a ghost." Tall, blonde, wrapped in a dress that probably cost more than Grace's monthly salary. Veronica Chase. The name had been mentioned at dinner a few times recently. Blake's new event coordinator at the law firm. "I'm sorry," Grace managed, though her throat felt tight. Veronica tilted her head, her smile widening. The staff entrance is around back, sweetie. This entrance is for guests. The tickets are $5,000 each. She gestured vaguely toward the side of the building. Easy mistake to make. Scattered laughter rippled through the small crowd gathering near the entrance. Grace felt her face flush hot. Her navy dress suddenly felt cheaper than it had when she'd put it on that evening. Simple. Classic. Or so she'd thought. I am a guest, Grace said quietly. Her voice barely rose above the murmur of conversation. Veronica's eyebrows lifted in exaggerated surprise. Oh, I'm so sorry. I just assumed. I'm tired, that's all. Grace took a small bite of the chocolate dessert. It was rich and sweet and tasted like nothing. When do the awards start? Any minute now. The senator's wrapping up his remarks. Grace nodded and forced herself to focus on the stage. Senator Davenport stood at the podium, his silver hair gleaming under the lights. He was talking about the power of philanthropy, the importance of investing in community health, the responsibility of those with resources to lift up those without. Noble words, true words, words Grace had spent years trying to live by. She'd wanted to use her mother's money wisely, quietly, without drawing attention or expecting recognition. She'd wanted to prove that wealth could be a tool for good, not just a status symbol. And somewhere along the way, she'd convinced herself that hiding her wealth made her virtuous, made her authentic, made her worthy of love. But maybe it just made her convenient, easy to manage. Blake was still at table 3, now deep in conversation with an older man Grace recognized as a hospital board member. Veronica had disappeared, probably to the restroom herself or to coordinate something behind the scenes. Event coordinators never really got to enjoy the events they planned. Grace felt a brief, bitter flash of sympathy before remembering Veronica's voice on the phone. The baby is his meal ticket. The sympathy vanished. Ladies and gentlemen, Senator Davenport's voice boomed through the sound system, pulling Grace back to the present. It is now my great honor to begin our awards ceremony. Tonight, we recognize individuals and organizations that exemplify the spirit of community service and transformative generosity. Applause filled the room. Grace clapped automatically, her hands moving while her mind raced elsewhere. Our first award tonight is the Outstanding Community Service Award, the senator continued. This honor recognizes an organization that has demonstrated exceptional commitment to improving health outcomes in underserved communities. Grace straightened slightly. The Riverside Community Foundation had nominated 3 organizations for this award. She'd written the nomination letters herself, compiling data on program outcomes, community impact, and sustainable practices. The senator began describing the winning organization, a free clinic serving immigrant communities. Grace knew them well. They did excellent work with limited resources. They deserved recognition. She applauded when they accepted the award. Watched their executive director give a tearful acceptance speech. Felt the strange disconnect of caring deeply about something while her personal life collapsed around her. Her phone buzzed. She checked it before she could stop herself. Lock, unlock, lock, Harrison. Lunch tomorrow at Riverside Cafe. Noon, important. The urgency in that single word, important, made Grace's chest tighten. Harrison never used that word lightly. She texted back. I'll be there. 3 dots appeared, disappeared, appeared again. Harrison, are you okay? Grace stared at the message. How did he know? Was there some sibling telepathy at work? Or had he simply learned to read between the lines of her increasingly terse text messages? She typed, we'll talk tomorrow. Using his own words against him felt satisfying in a small, petty way. Our next award, Senator Davenport announced, recognizes innovation in healthcare delivery. The recipients have developed groundbreaking programs that increase access to care while reducing costs, a balance that benefits everyone in our community. More applause. Another organization Grace had worked with. More good people doing good work. Rachel leaned close. You're doing that thing again. What thing? The phone thing. Lock, unlock, lock. Rachel's voice was gentle but firm. Talk to me. Grace shook her head. Not here, not now. Then when? I don't know. Grace set her phone down deliberately, face down on the table. I just need to get through tonight. Okay. Rachel squeezed her hand briefly. But I'm here whenever you're ready. Grace nodded, not trusting her voice. On stage, Senator Davenport had moved on to the next award category. Grace tried to focus, tried to be present, tried to care about the work she'd spent years supporting. But her mind kept circling back to Veronica's words. Blake's already talking to Marcus about divorce lawyers. Marcus Webb, Blake's law firm partner, a divorce attorney. Grace had met Marcus several times. He'd been at their wedding. He'd come to dinner parties. He'd always been friendly and charming and utterly professional. Had he known? Had Marcus been discussing Blake's plans to divorce her while shaking her hand and asking about her pregnancy? The baby kicked, as if reminding Grace of her presence, of what mattered, of who needed protecting. Grace pressed her hand against the movement, feeling the firm push of a tiny foot or fist. Her daughter, growing stronger every day, completely unaware of the storm gathering around her. What would Grace tell her daughter someday? How would she explain this? How would she describe the choices she'd made, the secrets she'd kept, the ways she'd failed to demand respect? Veronica reappeared, sliding back into her seat at table 3. Blake said something to her. She laughed and touched his arm again. Grace watched them. She didn't look away, didn't hide behind her phone or her dessert or small talk with Rachel. She just watched. And she saw what she'd been refusing to see for months, the way Blake leaned toward Veronica. The way his body angled in her direction. The way his attention stayed focused on her even when he was ostensibly talking to someone else. The way he never looked for Grace in the crowd. Ladies and gentlemen, Senator Davenport's voice cut through Grace's thoughts. Before we continue with our plan and awards, I'd like to take a moment to introduce a very special addition to this evening's program. Something in his tone made Grace focus, made the whole room focus. A woman was walking onto the stage. Grace recognized her instantly. Judge Margaret Sinclair, federal judge, civil rights advocate, and someone Grace hadn't seen in over 2 years. Someone who knew exactly who Grace was. Grace's heart began to pound for an entirely different reason. Judge Sinclair has been a friend of this hospital for many years, Senator Davenport explained. But tonight she's here for a different reason. She's here to present a new award, one that honors a legacy of quiet generosity and transformative impact. Grace's hands gripped the edge of the table. No, not tonight, not now, not like this. This award, Judge Sinclair said, her voice clear and strong, is established in honor of Eleanor Whitmore, a woman many of you may know by reputation. Though she preferred to work behind the scenes, Eleanor Whitmore was a philanthropist in the truest sense of the word. She loved humanity, and she spent her life proving it through action. The room was silent. Everyone listening. Grace couldn't breathe. The Eleanor Whitmore Legacy Award, Judge Sinclair continued, recognizes an individual who embodies Eleanor's values. Quiet service, transformative generosity, authentic commitment to community. Someone who works without seeking recognition, who gives without expecting praise, who understands that true wealth is measured in impact, not in bank accounts. Grace felt Rachel's hand on her arm, heard Rachel's sharp intake of breath. She'd never told Rachel either. Never told anyone who her mother really was. This inaugural award, Judge Sinclair said, her eyes scanning the crowd until they found Grace, goes to someone who has worked tirelessly in the nonprofit sector. Someone who has reviewed hundreds of grant applications, conducted countless site visits, advocated for programs and people who had no other voice. Someone who knew Eleanor intimately and carries forward her legacy every single day. Grace's vision tunneled. The room contracted to just the stage, just Judge Sinclair's face, just this moment that was about to change everything. It is my profound honor, Judge Sinclair said, her smile warm and genuine, to present the Eleanor Whitmore Legacy Award to Eleanor's daughter, Grace Whitmore Holloway. Silence. Complete, utter silence. Then, as if someone had flipped a switch, thunderous applause erupted. Grace sat frozen in her chair, her hands still gripping the table, her belly pressed against the edge, her heart racing so fast she thought she might faint. Across the room at table 3, Blake's face had gone completely blank. Confusion, then shock, then something darker. Dawning horror as he processed what had just been announced. Veronica's smirk, that permanent expression of superior amusement, froze, cracked, died. Diane, Blake's mother, dropped her wine glass. Red liquid spread across the white tablecloth like blood. Rachel's hand tightened on Grace's arm. "Grace, honey, you need to go up there." Grace couldn't move. "Grace," Rachel whispered urgently, "everyone's waiting." The applause continued, growing louder, more insistent. Judge Sinclair stood at the podium holding a crystal sculpture, waiting. Grace stood. It took everything she had, every ounce of strength, every bit of dignity she'd been hoarding for moments just like this. Her gaze traveled deliberately down Grace's body, lingering on her belly, then her dress, then her simple shoes. "Well, you know what they say about assuming. It's just that most of our guests are a bit more—" She paused as if searching for a diplomatic word. "Dressed for the occasion." Grace's hands trembled. She clasped them together in front of her stomach. The baby kicked, sharp and sudden, as if sensing her distress. "Grace, there you are!" Blake's voice. Grace turned, relief flooding through her. Her husband strode toward them, looking impossibly handsome in his tuxedo. His dark hair was perfectly styled. His smile was the one he used for clients. Confident, charming, completely impersonal. "Blake," Grace breathed. "This woman was just—" "Veronica," Blake interrupted smoothly, reaching them. He clasped Veronica's hand warmly. "I see you've met my wife." Veronica's expression shifted instantly. She smoothed her simple navy dress, placed both hands briefly on her belly, feeling her daughter kick in response. Then Grace Whitmore Holloway, 6 months pregnant, secretly wealthy, publicly humiliated, privately devastated, walked toward the stage to claim her mother's legacy. The distance from table 12 to the stage couldn't have been more than 50 yards. It felt like miles. Every step echoed in Grace's consciousness. The soft swish of her navy dress, the careful placement of her heels on the polished floor, the weight of her belly shifting with each movement. Every eye in the room followed her. Grace kept her head high. Her mother had taught her that. Eleanor Whitmore had walked into boardrooms full of men who underestimated her, walked into hospitals and schools and community centers where people doubted her intentions, walked through life with quiet dignity that demanded respect without ever asking for it. Grace could do this. She had to do this. The applause continued, sustained, growing louder as Grace drew closer to the stage. She passed table 7. A woman in an emerald gown stared openly, her mouth slightly open. The man beside her was already typing on his phone, probably Googling Eleanor Whitmore daughter, probably finding articles about the Whitmore Foundation, probably calculating net worth and inheritance and influence. Grace kept walking. Table 5. Claire Montgomery, the society columnist, was furiously scribbling notes. Her expression was pure journalistic glee. This was the story of the season. Mystery nonprofit worker revealed as secret heiress, at a charity gala no less. While pregnant, the narrative practically wrote itself. Grace kept walking. Table 3. Blake sat motionless. His face had progressed beyond shock into something Grace couldn't quite identify. Betrayal? Anger? Fear? All three. Diane looked like she'd been slapped. Her carefully maintained composure had shattered along with her wine glass. A waiter hovered nearby, uncertain whether to clean up the spill. Veronica had vanished, simply disappeared from her seat. Grace didn't look to see where she'd gone. Marcus Webb, Blake's law firm partner, looked fascinated. His lawyer brain was probably already calculating implications, consequences, opportunities. Grace didn't stop walking. The stage stairs appeared before her. 5 steps. She'd climbed thousands of stairs in her life. These should be no different, except her hands were shaking, and her vision was blurring slightly. And the baby was kicking so insistently, it felt like her daughter was trying to fight her way out. Grace gripped the railing, climbed. 1 step, 2 steps, 3. At the top, Judge Sinclair waited. Her expression was warm, knowing, slightly apologetic and fiercely proud all at once. "Your mother would be so proud," the judge whispered, pulling Grace into an embrace. "It's time, sweetheart." Grace wanted to laugh, or cry, or both. Instead, she returned the hug briefly, drawing strength from this woman who'd known Eleanor, who'd understood her, who'd carried forward her values in courtrooms and communities across the country. Judge Sinclair handed Grace the award, a crystal sculpture, elegant and substantial. The weight of it grounded Grace, made this real. She turned to face the audience. The applause began to fade as people settled back into their seats, waiting. Senator Davenport handed Grace the microphone. His smile was genuine. He'd known Eleanor too, had worked with her on legislation supporting community health initiatives. He squeezed Grace's shoulder gently. Grace looked out at the sea of faces, hundreds of people, most of them strangers, some of them colleagues, a few of them people she'd worked with for years without revealing who she really was. Her eyes found Rachel, still at table 12. Rachel's face was wet with tears. She was smiling and crying simultaneously, her expression pure love and support, and I knew there was more to your story. Grace took a breath, felt the baby kick, adjusted her grip on the microphone. Thank you, she began. Her voice sounded steadier than she felt. Thank you, Judge Sinclair. Thank you, Senator Davenport. Thank you all for this incredible honor. Another round of applause. Grace waited for it to subside. My mother, Grace continued, taught me that true wealth isn't measured in bank accounts but in impact. She lived simply while giving abundantly. She believed that privilege came with responsibility, and that responsibility was best exercised quietly, without fanfare or expectation of recognition. Grace paused, gathered her thoughts, felt the weight of 3 years of secrets pressing against her chest. When my mother died 5 years ago, I inherited more than money. I inherited a philosophy, a way of being in the world. She showed me that you could have resources and still choose humility, that you could write checks and still roll up your sleeves, that the most powerful thing you could do with wealth was to amplify other people's voices, not your own. She glanced at Blake. He was staring at her like he'd never seen her before, like she was a stranger wearing his wife's face. For the past 3 years, I've worked at the Riverside Community Foundation, Grace said. Not because I needed one, but because I needed to understand. I needed to see the work from the inside, needed to read grant applications written by people who were pouring their hearts into impossible challenges, needed to conduct site visits where directors apologized for messy offices and insufficient staff, while somehow managing to change lives with inadequate resources. Grace's hand moved to her belly. The baby had quieted as if listening. I've kept my work separate from my family's foundation for a reason, Grace continued. I wanted to earn credibility, wanted to learn without the complications that come with the Whitmore name, wanted relationships built on respect, not on what people thought I could do for them. She let that sink in, let people process the implications, let Blake understand exactly what she was saying. The Whitmore Foundation, Grace said, has distributed over $200 million in grants over the past 5 years. My brother Harrison and I have continued our mother's work, focusing on education, healthcare, and economic opportunity for underserved communities. We've tried to honor her example of strategic generosity and authentic engagement. More applause. Grace waited. This award means everything to me, she said, her voice softening. Not because of the recognition, but because it connects me publicly to my mother's legacy. She was the best person I've ever known. She taught me about compassion, about justice, about using resources as tools for liberation rather than walls for protection. Grace looked directly at Blake now. Let him see her, really see her, for the first time in 3 years. She also taught me about authenticity, Grace said, about the importance of being fully known, of trusting people with truth, of believing that real love requires real transparency. Blake's face had gone pale. I'm grateful to continue this work, Grace concluded, especially now as I prepare to teach my child about service, about compassion, about the responsibility that comes with privilege. My mother believed that every person deserves dignity, opportunity, and hope. I intend to spend my life proving she was right. Grace held up the crystal sculpture. Thank you for this honor. Thank you for supporting Metro Hospital. And thank you for doing the hard, necessary work of building a more just and compassionate community. My mother would be proud of all of you. The applause was deafening. People stood, a standing ovation. Grace stood at the podium, 6 months pregnant in her cheap dress, holding an award honoring her mother's legacy, watching her carefully constructed world crumble, and reform into something she didn't yet recognize. Judge Sinclair embraced her again. "Breathe," the judge whispered. "You did beautifully." Grace descended the stairs carefully. The applause continued. People reached out to touch her arm, to shake her hand, to offer congratulations as she made her way back to her table. She didn't look at Blake. Couldn't. Not yet. She reached table 12 and sank into her chair. Her legs were shaking. Rachel grabbed her hand. "Why didn't you tell me?" "I'm sorry," Grace whispered. "Don't apologize. Just explain later." Rachel squeezed her hand fiercely. "Eleanor Whitmore was your mother. Grace, do you know what this means?" Grace nodded. She knew exactly what it meant. It meant everything had changed. It meant there was no going back. It meant Blake now knew his convenient, manageable wife with no options was actually a woman with more resources, more power, and more options than he'd ever imagined. Her phone buzzed. She pulled it out, unlocked it. 17 text messages, 9 missed calls, 3 voicemails, all from Blake. Grace locked the phone and set it face down on the table. She placed both hands on her belly and felt her daughter kick. Strong, insistent, alive. "We're okay," Grace whispered. "We're going to be okay." And for the first time in months, she almost believed it. The rest of the gala passed in a blur. More awards, more speeches, dessert wine and coffee service. People kept approaching Grace's table, offering congratulations, asking questions, expressing amazement that they'd been working alongside Eleanor Whitmore's daughter without knowing it. Grace smiled, shook hands, accepted compliments with practiced grace. Surprise flickered across her features before settling into something more calculated. "Your wife, Blake? Why didn't you say something?" She turned to Grace with a smile that didn't quite reach her eyes. "I'm so sorry for the confusion. With the baby and everything, I just thought, well, you know how it is. These events can be so confusing." Blake laughed, actually laughed. The sound felt like a slap. "No harm done," he said easily. "Just a misunderstanding. Grace, I need to head inside. Senator Davenport wants to introduce me to the hospital board chairman. You don't mind, do you?" It wasn't really a question. Grace stared at him. Her husband, the man she'd married 3 years ago, the man who was supposed to protect her, defend her, stand beside her. He was already turning away. "Blake," Grace started. "I'll catch up with you inside," he called over his shoulder, already moving through the entrance with Veronica at his side. Their heads bent together as they walked, all while her phone continued buzzing with increasingly frantic messages from Blake. She didn't read them, didn't need to. She could imagine the progression. Shock, confusion, anger, bargaining, the same stages people went through with grief because Blake was grieving too, mourning the loss of the wife he thought he had. Rachel stayed close, running interference when people became too insistent. "Grace needs to rest," she'd say firmly. "The baby, you understand." People nodded sympathetically and retreated, though their eyes stayed hungry for more information. Around 10 o'clock, the gala began winding down. People drifted toward the exits, collecting coats and calling cars. Grace stood carefully, her body aching from sitting in one position too long. "Let me drive you home," Rachel offered. "I drove here." "You're in no condition to drive. We'll get your car tomorrow." Grace wanted to argue, wanted to maintain some illusion of independence and capability. But Rachel was right. She was exhausted, emotionally drained, physically depleted. "Okay," Grace agreed. "Thank you." They made their way toward the exit. Grace kept her eyes forward, trying to avoid the stares and whispers that followed her movement through the room. "Grace," Blake's voice, urgent, too loud. Grace stopped walking, considered pretending she hadn't heard. Decided that was childish. She turned. Blake was striding toward them, his face flushed. Whether from wine or emotion, Grace couldn't tell. Probably both. "We need to talk," Blake said. Not a request, a demand. "Tomorrow," Grace replied calmly. "I'm tired." "No, now." Blake reached for her arm. Rachel stepped between them. She said, "Tomorrow." Blake's eyes snapped to Rachel. "This is a private matter." "Then discuss it privately." "Tomorrow." Rachel's voice had gone cold, protective. "Grace is exhausted. She's pregnant. She needs rest." Grace is my wife, Blake said, his voice rising. I have the right. You have the right to nothing, Rachel interrupted. Not when you're acting like this. Several people had stopped to watch. Grace could feel their attention like pressure against her skin. Blake, Grace said quietly, please, not here. Something in her tone must have penetrated his anger. Blake stopped, looked around, registered the watching eyes, his jaw clenched. Fine, tomorrow, but you owe me an explanation. Grace almost laughed. She owed him? After 3 years of hiding himself from her? After months of planning a divorce? After letting Veronica humiliate her? But she didn't say any of that. Not here. Not in front of an audience. Tomorrow, Grace agreed. Come to the apartment. Noon. Blake nodded curtly and turned away. Grace watched him stride back toward Marcus Webb, who'd been observing the entire exchange with professional interest. Let's go, Rachel murmured. They walked to Rachel's car in silence. The night air was cool against Grace's flushed skin. She lowered herself into the passenger seat carefully, adjusting her position to accommodate her belly. Rachel drove through quiet streets. Neither of them spoke until they were several blocks from the hotel. Do you want to talk about it? Rachel finally asked. Not yet, Grace said. Not tonight. Okay. Rachel glanced at her. But Grace, that was incredibly brave. What you did up there. Grace shook her head. It wasn't planned. I didn't know Judge Sinclair was going to do that. Still, the way you spoke, the way you owned it. Rachel paused. Your mother would have been proud. Tears threatened. Grace blinked them back. Maybe. Definitely. Rachel navigated a turn. How long has Blake not known? Since the beginning, since before the beginning. Grace stared out the window at passing streetlights. I never told him. I wanted him to love me for me, not for the money. And instead, he was planning to divorce you because he thought you had no money. Grace's breath caught. You heard? Some of it. After you came back from the restroom, you looked devastated. I pieced things together. Rachel's hands tightened on the steering wheel. Grace, I'm so sorry. It's not your fault. No, but I'm sorry anyway. Sorry you're going through this. Sorry that man turned out to be exactly who I worried he was. Grace turned to look at her friend. You worried? Of course I worried. He never asked about your family, never seemed interested in your life before him, never made space for your grief about your mother. Rachel sighed. But you seemed happy, so I kept my mouth shut. They pulled up in front of Grace's apartment building, a modest complex in a decent neighborhood. Nothing fancy, nothing that would suggest the woman living there was worth hundreds of millions of dollars. Do you want me to come up? Rachel asked. Grace shook her head. I need to be alone. Need to think. Call me if you need anything. I mean it, Grace. Anything. 3 in the morning doesn't matter. I will. Grace leaned over and hugged her friend. Thank you. For everything, for tonight, for always. Rachel squeezed her tight. That's what friends do. Real friends who love you for you, not for what you can do for them. Grace climbed out of the car and made her way into the building. The elevator ride to the 3rd floor felt endless. She unlocked her apartment door and stepped into silence. The apartment was dark, empty. Exactly as she'd left it hours ago when she'd been a different person living a different life. Grace turned on a single lamp. Soft light filled the living room. Simple furniture, books on shelves, photos on the walls, a life carefully constructed to look normal. Her phone buzzed. She pulled it out and finally looked at Blake's messages. The first few were confused. What just happened? Is this real? Eleanor Whitmore was your mother? Then angry. Why didn't you tell me? 3 years of lies. How could you do this to me? The most recent ones were calculating. We need to talk about finances. This changes things. We should meet with Marcus. Grace scrolled through them all, read each one carefully. Then she opened her contacts and found a different number. Harrison answered on the second ring. I just got 17 texts from various society friends. Tell me what happened. Grace sank onto the couch. Judge Sinclair presented a new award tonight, the Eleanor Whitmore Legacy Award. She gave it to me, publicly announced who I am in front of 400 people. Oh, Grace, Harrison's voice was gentle. How did Blake react? How do you think? Badly? Spectacularly badly. Silence on the other end. Then, do you want me to come over? I can be there in 20 minutes. Grace considered it. Considered having her brother here, having someone on her side, having family. But she needed to do this alone, needed to face what was coming. No, she said, but thank you. What did you want to talk about tomorrow? You said it was important. It can wait. Harrison, he sighed. The foundation board wants to restructure. They think it's time to be more public about our involvement. Build a stronger brand, leverage our story for greater impact. Grace closed her eyes, of course. The universe had a sense of humor. Judge Sinclair is on the board, Grace said slowly. She knew this was coming. She thought you should control the narrative, should claim your identity on your terms. Harrison paused. She didn't mean to blindside you. I know. And Grace did know. Judge Sinclair had been protecting her in the only way she could, by making sure Grace's truth came out in a space where Grace held power, where she was being honored, where no one could diminish her. We'll talk tomorrow, Harrison said. Get some rest. Harrison, did you ever think I was making a mistake, hiding who I was? Every day. His honesty was brutal and loving all at once. But it was your choice to make, your life to live. I think I made the wrong choice. Maybe, but you can make different choices now. They said goodbye. Grace set her phone down and sat in the quiet apartment, her hand on her belly. The baby was sleeping, finally calm after a night of constant movement and agitation. Grace stood and walked to the nursery, the room she'd been preparing for months, lavender walls, her mother's favorite color, white furniture, soft blankets and tiny clothes waiting to be worn. She sat in the rocking chair and let herself cry, really cry, the ugly, desperate crying she'd been holding back for months, for years, crying for her marriage, for her loneliness, for her mother, for all the ways she tried to be small and safe and loved. She cried until she had nothing left, until her eyes were swollen and her chest ached and her throat burned. Then she wiped her face, placed both hands on her belly, and made a promise to her daughter. I will teach you, Grace whispered, to never make yourself smaller for someone else's comfort. I will teach you that you deserve to be fully known and fully loved. I will teach you that hiding your truth doesn't protect you. It just makes you invisible. The baby kicked, one strong, certain kick. I know, Grace said. I'm learning too. Grace didn't sleep. She lay in bed, staring at the ceiling, feeling her daughter move and kick and press against her ribs. Around 3 in the morning, she gave up trying. She got up, made chamomile tea, and sat in the nursery. Lavender walls glowed softly in the dim light from the hallway. Grace had painted them herself, carefully choosing the exact shade her mother had loved. Not too purple, not too pink, just right. Veronica said something. Blake laughed again. Grace stood alone in the entrance, people flowing around her like water around a stone. Her phone buzzed in her small clutch. She pulled it out, unlocked it. Nothing important. Locked it again. Unlocked it. The screen blurred slightly. She blinked hard and locked it again. The baby kicked again, harder this time. It's okay, Grace whispered, her hand pressing against the spot where tiny feet pushed against her ribs. We're okay. But she wasn't sure she believed it. She forced herself to walk through the entrance. The Grand Marquis Ballroom stretched before her, a glittering sea of silk and diamonds in influence. Round tables draped in white linen filled the space. A stage dominated one end, backed by an enormous banner reading Annual Metro Hospital Charity Gala. Grace had worked on this event for months. Eleanor Whitmore had worn lavender perfume, not expensive designer fragrance, just simple lavender oil she bought at farmers markets and health food stores. The scent had followed her everywhere, into boardrooms and hospitals, into homeless shelters and university classrooms, into every space she entered with her quiet dignity and fierce compassion. Grace could almost smell it now, almost feel her mother's presence. What would Eleanor say about this mess? About Grace's choices? About the marriage that was crumbling? About the secrets that had finally been exposed? Grace knew, actually. Her mother had told her years ago in one of their last conversations before the cancer took her. They'd been sitting in the hospital room. Eleanor's hair had already fallen out from chemotherapy. She'd worn scarves and maintained her composure, even as her body betrayed her. Grace, Eleanor had said, her voice weak but clear. I need you to promise me something. Anything, Grace had replied. She'd been 24 years old, terrified of losing her mother, willing to promise anything if it would help. Don't hide who you are, not for anyone, not even for love. Eleanor had gripped Grace's hand with surprising strength. I spent too much of my early life trying to fit into spaces that were too small for me, trying to be acceptable, trying to be non-threatening. It nearly destroyed me. What changed? Grace had asked. I decided my comfort wasn't worth my soul. Eleanor had smiled, that fierce smile Grace had inherited. I decided that people who couldn't handle my full self didn't deserve access to any part of me. It was the most liberating and terrifying decision I ever made. Grace had promised, had meant it sincerely in that hospital room. And then she'd met Blake and broken her promise immediately. Now, sitting in the nursery at 3:30 in the morning, Grace understood something she hadn't before. She'd thought she was protecting her relationship by hiding her wealth. She'd thought she was being virtuous and humble and authentic. But really, she'd been afraid. Afraid Blake wouldn't love the real her. Afraid money would complicate things. Afraid of being wanted for the wrong reasons. So she'd created a version of herself that felt safe, manageable, small enough to fit into the life Blake had imagined, and he'd fallen in love with that smaller version. Had planned his life around someone who didn't actually exist. Grace's phone lit up on the dresser. A text from Blake, sent at 3:15. Can't sleep. Keep thinking about everything. How long were you planning to keep lying? She stared at the message. Lying. He thought she'd been lying. Maybe she had been. By omission, if nothing else. But Blake had been lying too, about Veronica, about his plans, about seeing Grace as a convenient wife with no options. Grace typed, I never lied. I just didn't tell you everything. The response came immediately. That's the same thing. Grace set the phone down without replying. She wasn't going to have this argument over text at 3:30 in the morning. She stood and moved to the closet where she'd been organizing baby clothes. Tiny onesies in soft colors. Sleepers with feet. Impossibly small socks that looked like doll clothes. Everything was ready. The crib assembled. The changing table stocked. The diaper bag packed for the hospital. Everything except Grace herself. She wasn't ready. Wasn't ready to be a single mother. Wasn't ready to navigate custody arrangements and divorce proceedings. Wasn't ready to explain to her daughter someday why her father had left. The baby kicked hard, as if disagreeing. You're right, Grace whispered, her hand on her belly. I'm stronger than I think I am. She'd survived losing her mother, had managed a fortune, had worked in a demanding field while maintaining her values, had endured tonight's revelation with grace and dignity. She could do this too. Grace returned to the rocking chair and pulled out her phone, opened her contacts, found a name she hadn't called in months. Philip Sterling, the family attorney who'd managed Eleanor's estate, who knew every detail of the Whitmore fortune, who'd always given Grace sound, thoughtful advice. She sent him a text. Need to discuss legal options. Can you meet tomorrow afternoon, 2 o'clock? She didn't expect a response until morning, but her phone buzzed within minutes. Philip, saw the news about the award, figured I'd be hearing from you. 2 o'clock works. My office or yours? Grace, yours. More private. Philip, Grace, are you okay? She stared at that question. Such a simple question. Such an impossible answer. Grace, I will be. Philip, Eleanor would be proud of you. Tears threatened again. Grace blinked them back. Grace, thank you. See you tomorrow. She set the phone down and closed her eyes. Rocked slowly in the chair meant for nursing her daughter. Felt the weight of all her choices pressing down on her. Her mother's voice echoed in her memory. Don't hide who you are. Not for anyone. Not even for love. Grace had spent 3 years hiding. 3 years making herself smaller. 3 years prioritizing someone else's comfort over her own truth. No more. Whatever happened with Blake, divorce, custody arrangements, division of assets, Grace would face it as herself. Fully herself. Eleanor Whitmore's daughter. A woman with resources and power and options. A woman who deserved to be loved for exactly who she was. The baby kicked again. Grace placed both hands on her belly and felt the movement. Strong, insistent, alive. Your grandmother was the bravest person I ever knew, Grace whispered. She taught me that authenticity matters more than comfort, that truth matters more than peace, that sometimes you have to burn down everything you've built to create something real. Another kick, agreement maybe, or just the natural movement of a growing baby. Grace stood and walked to the window. Dawn was still hours away, but she could wait. She'd been waiting her whole life for this moment, the moment she stopped hiding, stopped shrinking, stopped apologizing for taking up space. Her phone buzzed. Another text from Blake. I'm coming over now. We need to talk. Grace replied, no, noon, like we agreed. I'll see you then. Blake, this can't wait. Grace, it's waited 3 years. It can wait until noon. She turned off her phone, set it face down on the dresser, returned to the rocking chair, and waited for morning. Blake arrived at 11:30. Grace heard his key in the lock before she saw him. She'd been sitting on the couch, hands folded over her belly, waiting. He burst through the door with the energy of someone who'd been up all night rehearsing arguments. His hair was uncombed, his shirt was wrinkled. He looked like Grace felt, exhausted and desperate and hanging on by a thread. Grace, he started. You're early, Grace said calmly. I said noon. Blake stopped, looked at her sitting there, looked at the apartment he'd barely been present in for months, looked at the life he'd taken for granted. Die dead. I couldn't wait. He ran a hand through his messy hair. Grace, what the hell? Eleanor Whitmore was your mother, and you never thought to mention it. Would it have mattered? Grace asked. Would it have mattered? Blake's voice rose. Are you serious? You're worth hundreds of millions of dollars, and you ask if it would have mattered? I didn't ask if the money would have mattered. I asked if it would have mattered that Eleanor was my mother. Grace kept her voice level. If I had told you 3 years ago, would you have loved me differently? Blake stared at her. That's not the point. That's exactly the point. No, the point is you lied to me for 3 years. Blake started pacing, the same aggressive movement he used in courtrooms when he wanted to intimidate witnesses. You let me think you were just a nonprofit worker. You let me support you. You let me make decisions based on completely false information. Grace watched him pace, noticed he hadn't asked how she was feeling, hadn't acknowledged the baby, hadn't expressed any concern for her well-being after last night's emotional revelation. I never lied, Grace said. I worked at the nonprofit. I do work there. Everything I told you about my job was true. By omission, Grace, you lied by omission. Blake stopped pacing and faced her. Do you know how this makes me look? Everyone thinks I married you for money and I didn't even know you had money. I look like an idiot. There it was. The real issue. Not betrayal, not hurt, not loss of trust. His image, his reputation, how this made him look. Is that what you're worried about? Is you worried about? Grace asked quietly. How you look? Of course I'm worried about that. I'm a corporate attorney. My reputation is everything. And now everyone thinks. He stopped himself, seemed to realize how he sounded. Grace let the silence stretch. Let him sit with his own words. You should have told me, Blake finally said, his voice lower now. When we got married, when we found out about the baby. Sometime, you should have told me. You're right, Grace said. I should have. Blake blinked. He'd clearly been expecting a fight. Oh, well, good. I should have told you because honesty matters in a relationship, because partners deserve to know each other fully. Grace shifted position on the couch. Her back was aching. But Blake, you never asked. What? You never asked about my family. Never asked about my mother. Her job at the Riverside Community Foundation meant coordinating with hospitals, reviewing grant applications, ensuring donations reached the right programs. She'd helped select the nominees for tonight's awards. She'd worked late nights double-checking budgets while her back ached and her ankles swelled. And now she stood at the edge of the room, feeling like an intruder. Grace! She turned to find Rachel Turner, weaving through the crowd toward her. Rachel's red dress was bold and beautiful. Her dark hair was swept up elegantly. She was Grace's closest friend, the director of a women's shelter nonprofit. Someone who actually understood why Grace did this work. I saw what happened out there, Rachel said quietly, reaching Grace aside. She took Grace's arm gently. That woman is a nightmare. Blake didn't say anything, Grace heard herself say. The words tumbled out before she could stop them. He just stood there, he laughed. Rachel's jaw tightened. Men are idiots. Never wondered why I was so committed to nonprofit work or where I learned about philanthropy. Grace's voice remained calm, but each word landed like a stone. 3 years, Blake. 3 years of marriage, and you never once asked me about my life before you. Blake's jaw clenched. That's not fair, isn't it? When's my birthday? What? My birthday? When is it? Blake hesitated. July. June 14th. Grace continued before he could recover. What's my favorite food? What was my mother's name before I told you last night? What's my brother's profession? Where did I grow up? This is ridiculous. You don't know, do you? You don't know any of those things because you never asked. Grace felt something inside her breaking. Or maybe it was already broken and she was finally acknowledging it. You fell in love with a version of me that fit your narrative. Young wife. Grateful for your support. Easy to manage. Blake's face flushed. I never said that. But Veronica did. Silence. Complete silence. Blake went very still. What? Last night, before the awards. I overheard Veronica on the phone. Grace watched his face carefully. She said you were talking to Marcus about divorce lawyers, that you were waiting until after the baby was born to have leverage, that I had no options, no family money, no support system. Blake's face drained of color. Grace, is it true? That conversation was taken out of context. Is it true? Blake looked away, couldn't meet her eyes. We talked about options. That's what lawyers do. We discuss options. Options for divorcing your pregnant wife. You have to understand, things have been hard. You've been different since the pregnancy, distant. I thought, he stopped. You thought what? That you'd made a mistake? Grace's hands tightened on her belly. That you married the wrong woman? That you deserve better? I didn't say that. You didn't have to. Veronica said it for you. You're stronger than you know. Grace set the phone down and returned to packing. By evening, everything was boxed. Blake's presence erased from the apartment. Just empty spaces where his things had been. What will you do with all this space? Rachel asked, gesturing around the living room. I don't know yet. Maybe I'll stay here. Maybe I'll move. Grace surveyed the apartment. I need to figure out who I am now, what I want, where I belong. You belong wherever you decide to be, Rachel said firmly. You have choices now. Use them. Duh. 2 weeks later, Grace went into labor. 3 weeks early, but the baby was healthy and strong and ready to meet the world. Harrison drove her to the hospital at 2 in the morning. Rachel met them there. They stayed through the entire labor, holding Grace's hands, coaching her breathing, reminding her of her strength. At 6:43 in the morning, Eleanor Rachel Whitmore entered the world screaming. 7 pounds, 2 ounces, perfect in every way. Grace held her daughter and cried, not from pain, from moimei, from relief, from the overwhelming knowledge that this tiny human was worth everything, every difficult choice, every painful ending, every moment of fear and uncertainty. Hello, Eleanor, Grace whispered. I'm your mom. I'm going to mess up sometimes, but I promise I will always choose you, always protect you, always teach you that you deserve to be fully known and fully loved. The baby's eyes opened briefly, dark blue, unfocused, searching. Harrison stood beside the bed, tears streaming down his face. She looks like Mom. She does, Grace agreed. She really does. Rachel took photos, dozens of them. Grace holding Eleanor, Harrison holding Eleanor, the 3 of them together, documenting this new beginning. Later, when Eleanor was sleeping in the hospital bassinet and Grace was resting, Judge Sinclair came to visit. She brought flowers and a card and a small gift wrapped in lavender paper. I hope it's okay that I came, Judge Sinclair said. I know you need rest. It's more than okay, Grace gestured to a chair. Thank you for coming, and thank you for what you did at the gala. I know I didn't say it properly before. You don't need to thank me. I did what Eleanor would have wanted. Judge Sinclair looked at the sleeping baby. She's beautiful, Grace. She is. Have you thought about the foundation board meeting? About going public? Grace nodded slowly. I have, and I think I'm ready. Not right away. I need time with Eleanor first, but soon. Take all the time you need. The foundation has waited this long. It can wait a little longer. Judge Sinclair stood to leave. But Grace, when you're Kakati, your voice matters. Your story matters. Don't hide it because hiding feels safer. Share it because sharing might help someone else. After she left, Grace sat alone with her daughter. The hospital room was quiet, peaceful, just the two of them and the soft beeping of monitors. Grace's phone buzzed. A text from an unknown number. Congratulations on the baby. I hope everything goes well for you both. Blake. Grace stared at the message, felt nothing. No anger, no sadness. Just a distant acknowledgement that this man had once been important to her and now he wasn't. She deleted the message without responding. Eleanor stirred in her sleep, made tiny sounds. Grace picked her up and held her close, breathing in that newborn smell. Milk and warmth and infinite possibility. Grace took a deep breath. How long has it been going on? Nothing's going on. Blake, please, don't insult me more than you already have. He sat down heavily in the chair across from her, dropped his head into his hands. 6 months since she started at the firm. 6 months. Grace had been 3 months pregnant, dealing with morning sickness and exhaustion. Trying to manage her job while growing a human being, believing her husband loved her. Have you slept with her? No. Blake looked up. I swear, Grace, we haven't crossed that line. It's just been emotional. An emotional affair. An emotional affair, as if that was somehow better. As if giving his heart to someone else was less of a betrayal than giving his body. I see, Grace said. Grace, listen. I know this is bad. I know I screwed up. But we can work through this. We can go to counseling. We can... No, Tom. What? No, Blake, we can't. Grace stood up slowly, using the arm of the couch for support. She didn't know how to explain the compulsion. The need to do something with her hands. The way checking her phone gave her a moment to compose her face before the next wave of humiliation crashed over her. A waiter appeared with champagne. Grace shook her head. Rachel accepted a glass. How are you feeling? Rachel asked. Really feeling. Grace's hand moved to her belly again. The baby was quiet now, probably sleeping. Tired, swollen, enormous. You're beautiful. I'm a whale in a cheap dress, apparently. Stop that. Rachel's voice was sharp. You're 6 months pregnant, working full-time, and you still showed up tonight to support this cause. That woman is a vapid social climber who wouldn't know genuine compassion if it hit her in the face. Grace smiled despite herself. Tell me how you really feel. I'm just getting started. Rachel took a sip of champagne. How long has Blake been working with her? A few months. She's coordinating the firm's charity events. Your father made his choice, Grace whispered, and I made mine. I chose you. I chose truth. I chose to stop hiding. Eleanor's tiny hand wrapped around Grace's finger. I'm going to teach you so many things, Grace continued. I'm going to teach you that you're enough exactly as you are, that you don't need to be smaller or quieter or more convenient for anyone, that your worth isn't determined by who loves you or doesn't love you. The baby's eyes opened again, held Grace's gaze with that intense focus newborns have. Your grandmother was the bravest person I ever knew. She taught me that privilege is responsibility, that wealth is meaningless without purpose, that the most important thing you can do with resources is amplify other people's voices. Grace adjusted her hold, cradling Eleanor closer. I forgot those lessons for a while. I tried to be someone I wasn't. I hid parts of myself because I was afraid. Grace's voice caught. But you changed that. Knowing you were coming, knowing I needed to be an example for you, it made me remember who I really am. Eleanor yawned, impossibly tiny, impossibly perfect. We're going to be okay, Grace said. More than okay. We're going to be honest. We're going to be strong. We're going to be exactly who we are without apology. And sitting there in the quiet hospital room holding her daughter, Grace believed it. For the first time in years, she believed it completely. 6 months later, Grace stood in the main conference room of the Whitmore Foundation's new headquarters. Floor-to-ceiling windows overlooked the city. Eleanor, the baby, not the building, was strapped to Grace's chest in a carrier, sleeping peacefully against her mother's heartbeat. The foundation board sat around the conference table. Judge Sinclair, Senator Davenport, Harrison, several prominent philanthropists and nonprofit leaders. People who'd known Eleanor Whitmore. People who believed in her vision. "Thank you all for coming," Grace began. Her voice was steady, strong. "6 months ago, I stood on a stage and claimed my mother's legacy publicly for the first time. Today, I want to talk about what that legacy means going forward." She clicked to the first slide of her presentation. A photo of Eleanor Whitmore, smiling, wearing lavender, looking exactly like the person Grace remembered. "My mother believed that wealth was a tool, not a trophy, not a measure of worth, not something to hoard or display, a tool for building justice, creating opportunity, and amplifying voices that would otherwise go unheard." Grace clicked to the next slide. Statistics about the foundation's giving over the past 5 years. $200 million distributed. Thousands of lives impacted. Programs sustained and expanded. "We've done good work," Grace continued. "Quiet work, important work. But I think it's time to do more. Not just give money, but use our platform, our story, our voice." Eleanor, the baby, stirred. Grace adjusted her position automatically, one hand supporting the tiny head. "I propose we launch a campaign," Grace said. "No, not about us, about the organizations we support, about the people doing transformative work with inadequate resources. We use our visibility to shine light on their efforts. We use our access to open doors. We use our wealth to amplify impact." She clicked through several more slides. Detailed plans, budget projections, media strategies. "I also propose we establish a mentorship program, connecting young people from underserved communities with leaders in philanthropy, nonprofit management, and social entrepreneurship, showing them that this world isn't closed to them, that they belong here too." Judge Sinclair smiled. Senator Davenport nodded approvingly. Harrison watched Grace with obvious pride. Finally, Grace said, "Torsten, I propose we create the Eleanor Whitmore Fellowship, an annual award of $1 million to an individual under 40 who is doing revolutionary work in their community. No strings attached, no restrictions, just resources given to people who are proving what's possible." She paused. Let that sink in. "My mother lived simply while giving abundantly. I want to honor that, but I also want to step out of the shadows, to show my daughter that having resources means having responsibility. That privilege can be used as a tool for liberation. That authenticity matters more than comfort." Grace clicked to the final slide. A quote from Eleanor Whitmore. "The question isn't whether you have enough. The question is what you do with what you have." "I have enough," Grace said simply. "More than enough. And I want to do something meaningful with it. Not just write checks, but build systems, create opportunities, change narratives about what wealth can mean." The room was silent for a moment. Then Judge Sinclair began clapping. Others joined in. Within seconds, the entire board was applauding. Harrison stood and came to Grace's side. "Mom would be so proud," he said quietly. "I hope so," Grace replied. The meeting continued for another hour. Questions, suggestions, refinements to Grace's proposals. By the end, the board had approved everything, authorized funding, committed to supporting this new, more visible phase of the foundation's work. Afterward, Grace stood by the windows with Eleanor, looking out at the city below. Rachel joined her, carrying 2 cups of coffee. "You were incredible in there," Rachel said, handing Grace a cup. "I was terrified." "That doesn't make you any less incredible." Rachel looked at the baby. "How's little Eleanor doing?" "She's perfect, sleeping through most nights now, smiling at everything, growing so fast I can barely keep up." "And you, how are you?" Grace considered the question, really considered it. 6 months ago, she'd been pregnant and miserable, and trapped in a marriage that was slowly suffocating her. She'd been hiding who she was, pretending to be smaller, accepting less than she deserved. Now she was a single mother, the public face of a major foundation, a woman who'd chosen herself and her daughter over comfort and convenience. "I'm good," Grace said, "really good. For the first time in years, I feel like myself." Rachel squeezed her shoulder. Eleanor would be proud. Both Eleanors. They stood together watching the city, two friends who'd weathered storms together, who'd supported each other through endings and beginning moans. Grace's phone buzzed. A text from Philip Sterling. "Final divorce decree came through. It's official. You're free." Grace stared at the message. Free. Such a simple word, such a complicated reality. She was free from Blake, free from hiding, free from the suffocating compromise of pretending to be someone she wasn't. But she was also tied, beautifully permanently tied, to this tiny human sleeping against her chest, to the foundation her mother had built, to the responsibility of using her resources wisely. Freedom and responsibility. They weren't opposites. They were partners. Grace typed back, "Thank you for everything, Philip." She put her phone away and looked down at Eleanor. The baby was waking up, her blue eyes opening slowly. "Hello, sweet girl," Grace whispered. "Did you sleep well?" Eleanor made a soft sound, not quite a coo, not quite a cry, just the sound of a baby waking up and seeing her mother's face. "We have a big life ahead of us," Grace told her daughter. "A complicated, messy, beautiful life. I'm going to teach you about your grandmother, about using privilege as responsibility, about staying authentic even when hiding feels safer." Eleanor's hand found Grace's finger, gripped it with surprising strength. "I'm going to teach you that you're enough," Grace continued, "exactly as you are, that you never need to make yourself smaller. That the people who truly love you will love all of you, not just the convenient parts." The baby's eyes held Grace's gaze, intense, focused, as if she understood every word. "Your father made his choice," Grace said softly. "He chose not to be here, and that's okay, because you're surrounded by people who did choose you. Uncle Harrison, Aunt Rachel, Judge Sinclair, Senator Davenport, so many people who already love you." Eleanor yawned. Grace smiled. "And me," Grace whispered. "I chose you. I will always choose you. Every single day." Harrison rejoined them by the window. "Ready to go? I thought we could get dinner. Celebrate the board's approval." "Sounds perfect." Grace adjusted Eleanor's carrier. "Where should we go?" "Anywhere you want. Your choice." Your choice. Such simple words. Such a gift. For years, Grace had let other people make choices for her, had accommodated, had compromised, had hidden herself and to make space for others. No more. "Let's go to that new place by the river," Grace decided. "The one with the outdoor seating. Eleanor loves watching the water." They gathered their things and headed out. Grace walked through the foundation's headquarters with her head high and her daughter secure against her chest. As they left the building, Grace caught her reflection in the glass doors. A woman in her 30s, successful, strong, carrying a baby and carrying forward a legacy. She looked like her mother, not just physically, though the resemblance was there, but in the way she held herself, in the quiet confidence, in the knowledge that she was enough. Eleanor, the baby, stirred and looked up at Grace, those blue eyes so full of trust, so full of love. "Your grandmother used to say that the truth matters less than timing," Grace told her daughter. "But I think authenticity matters most of all. Being fully known, being fully yourself, that's the real truth. We can't work through this because there's no this to work through. You don't love me. You love the idea you had of me. And I don't love what you've become. Or maybe you were always this person, and I just didn't want to see it. You're being irrational. You're upset about last night. I'm being clear for the first time in months." Grace walked to the kitchen and poured herself a glass of water. Her hands were steady. That surprised her. "I overheard Veronica say I had no options. No family money, no support system. She was wrong on all counts." Blake stood. "Grace, I know you're angry, but we need to think about this practically. We have a child coming. We have a marriage. We have 3 years of history." We have 3 years of you not knowing me and not wanting to know me. Grace drank the water, set the glass down carefully. I met with my attorney this morning. Your attorney? Blake's voice sharpened, his lawyer instincts kicking in. Philip Sterling. He's been the Whitmore family attorney for 20 years. Grace pulled 2 folders from her bag on the counter. She'd prepared them before Blake arrived. He helped me draft 2 documents. You get to choose which one we use. Blake's eyes narrowed. What are you talking about? Grace handed him the first folder. Option 1, a post-nuptial agreement. $5 million, clean settlement, no custody of the baby. You walk away with enough money to start over, and our daughter grows up without confusion about who her father is or whether he wanted her. Blake opened the folder. His eyes scanned the document. $5 million and no parental rights? Grace, you can't be serious. I'm completely serious. Grace handed him the second folder. Option 2, divorce, public, messy. Discovery will reveal your affair with Veronica, your plans to use our daughter as leverage, your character. The court will decide custody and assets. Given that I have substantial resources and you were planning to divorce me while I was pregnant, I'm confident about how that will go. Blake stared at both folders. You're blackmailing me. I'm giving you a choice. That's more than you gave me. Grace returned to the couch and sat down. You have 24 hours to decide. This is insane. You can't just... I can actually. I have excellent lawyers. I have documentation. I have resources. Grace met his eyes. I have options, Blake. All the options you thought I didn't have. Blake's face cycled through emotions. Anger, fear, calculation. She could see his lawyer brain working. Assessing odds, weighing outcomes. What if I fight this? He asked. What if I contest everything? I could make this very expensive for you. You could try. Grace's voice was calm. But Blake, think about what that means. A public divorce. All your colleagues knowing about Veronica. All those hospital board members you were networking with, learning you were planning to leave your pregnant wife. Claire Montgomery writing columns about it. She paused. How would that look for your career? For your reputation? For the image you've worked so hard to build? Blake's jaw worked. She'd hit the mark. His reputation mattered more than anything else. $5 million is generous, Grace continued. It's more than you'd get in a divorce settlement and so on. It's more than enough to start over. And this way, you get to control the narrative. You can tell people we mutually decided to part ways, that the marriage wasn't working, that you're respecting my need to raise our daughter in a stable environment. And if I want to be part of my daughter's life, Grace looked at him, really looked at him. Do you actually want to be a father, or do you want the appearance of being a father? The photo opportunities, the social credit for being involved. Blake didn't answer. That's what I thought, Grace said softly. Blake, you're not a bad person. You're just not the person I thought you were. And I'm not the person you thought I was. We can end this cleanly, or we can destroy each other in court. Your choice. Blake stood there, both folders in his hands, his expression unreadable. 24 hours, Grace repeated. Philip's contact information is in both documents. Call him when you decide. Where will you be? That's no longer your concern. Blake flinched. Grace, I never meant for things to go this way. I know. And she did know. He hadn't set out to be cruel. He'd just been thoughtless, self-centered, incapable of seeing past his own needs. I did love you, Blake said quietly. At the beginning, I did. You loved a version of me that I created because I didn't trust you with the real me. Grace placed her hands on her belly. We both made mistakes, but I'm not going to let those mistakes define the rest of my life. Or my daughter's life. Blake moved toward the door, stopped, turned back. For what it's worth, I'm sorry. About Veronica, about the planning, about not defending you last night. Thank you for saying that. He nodded and left. The door closed quietly behind him. Grace sat in the silence of the apartment she'd shared with a man who'd never really known her, who'd never really wanted to know her. Her phone buzzed. Rachel, how are you? Do I need to come over? Grace, I'm okay. Blake just left. It's over. Rachel, over. Grace, very over. I'll explain later. She set the phone down and closed her eyes, felt her daughter moving inside her. Strong kicks, insistent presence. Just you and me now, Grace whispered. You and me and Uncle Harrison and Aunt Rachel and everyone who actually loves us. The baby kicked in response. Grace stood and walked to the nursery one more time. Lavender walls, white furniture, everything ready and waiting. She sat in the rocking chair and let herself feel everything she'd been holding back. Relief, grief, fear, hope. All of it mixed together in a complicated emotional cocktail that left her breathless. She'd done it. She'd stood up for herself. She'd demanded respect. She'd refused to accept less than she deserved. Eleanor would have been proud. Grace pulled out her phone and called Harrison. How did it go? He answered immediately. I gave him two options. Postnup with $5 million and no custody, or public divorce. Harrison was quiet for a moment. Gracie, are you sure about the no custody clause? That's permanent. I'm sure he doesn't want to be a father. He wants to avoid responsibility while maintaining his image. Grace rocked slowly. This way, my daughter grows up knowing her father made a choice. And when she's old enough to understand, I'll tell her the truth. All of it. Okay, I trust your judgment. Harrison paused. How are you feeling? Terrified, relieved? He laughed, Rachel. I know, honey, I know. Rachel squeezed her arm. Come on, let's get you sitting down. You look exhausted. Grace let herself be led to their assigned table. Table 12, not near the stage, not near the influential donors. Somewhere in the middle of the room where people like her belonged. People who worked for nonprofits and wore simple dresses and didn't quite fit. She lowered herself into a chair carefully. Everything was harder at 6 months pregnant. Sitting, standing, breathing, existing. Across the room, she could see Blake. He was talking to an older man in an expensive suit. Veronica hovered nearby, her hand occasionally touching Blake's arm as she laughed at something the older man said. Grace's phone buzzed again. She checked it automatically. Lock, unlock, lock. You're going to wear out that screen, Rachel observed, settling into the chair beside her. I'm just checking, Grace murmured. Checking for what? Grace didn't answer. Exhausted, all of it at once. That's normal. You just blew up your entire life. I know. But Gracie, you did the right thing. You deserve better. You always did. Tears came then. Grace let them fall. I miss Mom. I know, I miss her too. Harrison's voice was gentle. But she's proud of you. Wherever she is, she's proud. How do you know? Because I'm proud of you, and I learned it from her. They talked for a few more minutes about logistics, about the foundation, about when Harrison would come to town, about what Grace needed. When they hung up, Grace felt more centered, more grounded. She was Eleanor Whitmore's daughter. She had resources, she had family, she had options, and she had a daughter on the way who would never, ever doubt her worth. Blake called Philip Sterling at 4:30 that afternoon. Grace was at Harrison's hotel when her phone rang with the news. He chose the postnup, Philip reported, his voice professional but pleased. $5 million, no custody, clean break. He wants to sign as soon as possible. Grace closed her eyes. Relief flooded through her. Thank you, Philip. He negotiated one thing. He wants the narrative to be mutual. No public statements about affairs or divorce plans, just a quiet separation. That's fine. I don't want drama. I just want it done. We'll have papers ready tomorrow. He can sign then, and you'll sign after your lawyer reviews everything. Philip paused. Grace, I know this is hard, but you made the right choice. You're protecting yourself and your daughter. After they hung up, Grace sat in Harrison's hotel suite and processed the information. It was really over. Her marriage, her carefully constructed normal life, all of it ending with signatures on legal documents. Harrison handed her a cup of tea. How do you feel? Like I can breathe for the first time in months. Grace accepted the tea gratefully. Is that terrible? Should I feel sadder? You feel what you feel. There's no should. Harrison sat beside her. You've been mourning this marriage for a while. The ending is just making it official. Grace nodded. That was true. She'd been grieving since she'd started noticing Blake's distance, since she'd realized their marriage was more performance than partnership. Judge Sinclair called, Harris, and said, "She wanted to check on you. I should call her back. She understands you need time. But Gracie, she and the foundation board want to meet next week. They want to discuss the restructure, going public with our involvement." Grace sipped her tea. "What do you think?" "I think it's time. Mom worked in the shadows because she chose to. But you don't have to make the same choice. You can be public about the work. Use your story to inspire others. Show people what responsible wealth looks like. Or I could just keep working quietly." "You could. But is that what you want? Or is that what you think you should want?" Harrison's gaze was steady. "Because there's a difference." Grace thought about that, about what she wanted versus what she'd been conditioned to want, about authenticity versus performance. "I don't know yet," she admitted. "Can I wait until after the baby's born to decide?" "Of course, the foundation isn't going anywhere." Harrison squeezed her shoulder. "Neither am I. Whatever you need, Gracie, I'm here." Sam. 3 days later, Blake signed the post-nuptial agreement in Philip Sterling's office. Grace wasn't there. Didn't need to be. She was at home, packing up Blake's remaining belongings, preparing to ship them to whatever address he provided. Rachel came over to help. They worked mostly in silence, filling boxes with clothes and books and the detritus of a failed marriage. "How are you really doing?" Rachel finally asked, folding one of Blake's suits. "Better than I expected. Worse than I'd like." Grace taped a box shut. "It's strange. I thought I'd be devastated. But mostly I just feel relieved." "That's not strange. That's normal when you have been unhappy for a long time." Grace moved to the window. Outside, life continued. People walked dogs, children played. The world kept turning despite her personal upheaval. "I keep thinking about what I'll tell her," Grace said, her hand on her belly. "My daughter, when she asks about her father." "You tell her the truth. Age-appropriate truth, but truth." Rachel joined her at the window. "You tell her that sometimes people aren't ready to be parents, that it's better to be honest about that than to pretend, that her father made a choice, but it wasn't a reflection on her worth. And if she asks why I married him, you tell her you were young, that you made choices based on who you were then, that you learned and grew and did better." Rachel looked at her. "You tell her what your mother taught you, that authenticity matters more than comfort, that it's never too late to choose yourself." Grace nodded. That felt right. Her phone buzzed. A text from Philip. "Papers signed, money will transfer tomorrow. He's moving out of state. New job opportunity in Seattle." Seattle, 3,000 miles away. Blake was running, starting over somewhere he could rewrite his narrative without constant reminders of his failures. "Grace, thank you for everything, Philip." "Philip, Eleanor would be proud."